Willkommen, bienvenue, welcome once again to another podcast. Now, normally in this slot is Property Matters, but we have a special edition of that, which we call Construction Matters, and part of that is all Michelle Carr's fault. She runs Construction Alchemy. She is a self-styled contractor's supporter, or the guardian angel of construction, self-styled. And today's topic is also her fault. We're talking today about why construction is losing both skills and SMEs. But before we do that, as is traditional on this channel, we're throwing Hamish mercilessly under the bus.
It's somewhat unfortunate that we are speaking very often at the moment on a sort of negative aspect of what is going on within property. We've got on the one side a great deal of enthusiasm for properties to be built, for things to happen, but unfortunately we've got this sort of rather sort of negative aspect on the other side of things. Various happenings over a period of time are contributing, particularly when efforts are made to change things, that the full account of what is required isn't being taken into consideration. Now, it's been spoken about for some years, but it hasn't actually been pursued for several sort of reasons. People taking advantage of things like apprenticeships to a certain extent. That didn't help matters, but also because of the change, the way in which the government is doing things, it didn't help any by pushing up national contributions, because obviously that's going to reduce employment. But what is happening, there's a great loss of skill, and we were dependent upon certain European countries, actually, from some of these skill factors going back a few years prior to COVID, because they this was a daft thing. It's worth mentioning because it's relative to our economy. A lot of people came over from Europe and were working in the UK because it's a good place to work. Along came lockdown, along came COVID. And of course, they went back home to spend time with their families. So they didn't. Now, unfortunately, it took our skill back. But when they got back home, they realized the economies were so much better than what they had been when they came over here to work, that they stayed where they were. What's the point of coming back to the UK if you're going to be worse off? So that's how we've lost. But what is going on is the big boyos, as ever, have the funds to be able to push through all sorts of things. And they are putting pressure on the smaller guys, the SMEs, who mean so much to what goes on within industry in this country. And particularly, not just, but it is a very, very important factor within building, because it's those smaller companies who actually take on board those young apprentices, because they very often family members or people that they actually know to become apprentices to actually sort of work with that. Now, if we lose those small to medium enterprises, we're not going to have people in the marketplace, because the big guys don't want to mess with stuff like that. I say that, but overall, it is the smaller companies who will actually take on, because they will nurture their team. They will work with their team. They will develop the skills of that particular team. And we're losing out a great deal on that. And it's something which I hadn't actually thought about, but it is making a significant difference, because a lot of those SMEs, those smaller companies, are being forced out of the building industry.
Michelle Carr, welcome. Is there a sort of construction brain drain going on? Is that what's going on here?
So I have a theory about some of the issues in the construction industry. I have a number of theories, but the biggest one for me is most of the companies I work for and have worked with over the last 25 years, I've worked with a lot of subcontractors. So being a quantity surveyor for 20 odd years, I would be dealing with the bosses quite a lot. And obviously you get to know these people. Some of these projects were lasting 2 or 3 years. And most of them back in the day came into construction because they were told at school they weren't academic, so they needed to learn a trade. Right. So you and I have discussed this numerous times, and how that changes the mindset with these people, because we'll go into this in a bit more detail in a moment. But The difference is now when you're at school, there is much more to do. There's not just science, maths, English. You have hundreds of subjects that you can do. So if you're not academic in the traditional sense, there are many other avenues that you can go down that don't necessarily involve instruction. And the world has changed massively. And now, I mean, it won't be long before you'll have courses in GCSE or BTEC or whatever different qualifications you've got for AI generation or something like that. Like, it's moved on. There's a lot to do with design and technology and other things, beauty and other sort of qualifications you can get in school, and it's not the same as it was when all of us were at school. So that's one aspect of it. Is there used to be two choices. There was academia or trade, and if you weren't fitting in down the academic route, then trade was your only other option. The second thing, when it comes with apprenticeships, I'm on the fence with apprenticeships. I agree with them and I think they're brilliant, but I don't think the rules are strict enough, and I don't think there's enough checking up, because there are a number of people that I know, and personally, my daughter's 19. She has a number of friends, her boyfriend's brother, other friends of her age that are in apprenticeships, and there are really, really good ones, incredible ones, and there are absolutely awful ones, and she's aware of, and I know personally of some young lads that have been taken fully advantage of, and they're just cheap labour. And the subcontractor puts them on sites, charges them £40 a day, pays them, £40 a day, probably charges the client 150, 200, whatever it may be. They're not giving them the experience, and and as soon as they either stand up for themselves or actually get qualified, they move on to the next one, and they just use them for cheap labour. Now, without the right schemes in place and without the right funding in place, potentially that may dry up and that may cause a problem. But also on the flip side, and this isn't really for this conversation, on the flip side, some of the attitudes of these teenage kids, because of the way of the world now, and they want to be YouTubers and LinkedIners and whatever they want to do, they don't want to work. So there's that aspect too, but I mean, that's a whole different conversation for a whole different platform. But they're the key issues for me.
I would say us LinkedIners, we do like working quite hard.
But probably the wrong word, but yeah, you know what I mean. They want to, don't they?
I quite like it. I'll be a LinkedIner. I'll have it. Hamish, it seems to me that, as Michelle said, there's so many other ways that you can express yourself these days. It's less. You're either a trade or you're an academic, or you're a trade or you're a banker. Now you can go out and be a florist with a side order of beauty. Is that the reason, as Michelle says, that there's less going there?
No, and yet again, I do like actually when we have conversations when Michelle is with us, because she brings certain aspects in that hadn't come to mind. And I should have realized this, because just over 20 years ago, I was a teacher. And I was working in schools, and one of the main reasons my last teaching position that I had was working with students. I'd actually gone to the school to work with students who weren't too enthusiastic about attending school. And therefore, we did various things. And part of what we were actually doing was giving them job placements. And I would get them work for a couple of days a week. So effectively, they were learning a trade. They were doing painting and decorating. They were working with plumbers. They were working on building sites. And they thoroughly enjoyed it, because twofold, they didn't have to be in school learning. And of course, when they did come into school, they had me to contend with, because I was their teacher pretty well full time. But it was great because we had all these computers about the place. But there wasn't this emphasis on, if you like, the non-physical sort of types of trades that are now evolving that Michelle spoke about. But we've had a switch now, because there aren't as many people. But I think the main thing, and although Michelle did say this, it wasn't part of what we were discussing, a major contribution to this has been the attitude switch in youngsters, because you did get some really enthusiastic, they really wanted to leave school so they could go and work with their uncles, so they could go and work with their dad, so they could go and do. There's been a switch within society. It's a societal switch as much as anything else. But the digital age has sort of been here, because what do we say what do so many people say when their children get to the age of 8 or 9? Oh, yeah, have a tablet, have have a mobile phone to actually play
Yeah.
with. Go and do that instead of building stuff. The building bricks, they're left alone at a very, very young age these days. So I think there is that attitude switch as well. But I think the combination of that, so we're not getting the youngsters who are interested in coming in, but I think also we don't have enough of those smaller type, sort of family type businesses with a team of sort of 2 or 3 working together who would actually, like Michelle suggested, train them and involve those, if you like, those youngsters to get into that trade and really enjoy and feel proud of what they were doing. And because we don't have that, the bigger companies are taking over, and they're trying to, if you like, put pressure on the younger ones, the smaller businesses. And because they're putting the pressure on the smaller, because they've had pressure put on those, we want so many more houses, so much. The cost of everything has sort of gone up. And I used to find this going back to when I was working with engineering. Take a price out of the cost of the stuff you're buying. Well, that isn't the cost. The cost is what you're paying people to work. You need to pay people to work. And if you put pressure on subcontractors and you're not paying them the money they deserve, they're not going to last terribly long.
Michelle, is it simply the matter that we need to give kids building blocks at an early age, or is there more to it than that?
No, I think that there's a much bigger picture here. And the bigger problem is the fact that I would think that a lot of parents and a lot of families don't want their kids to go into construction because it's an absolute awful industry to be in. It's horrific. It always has been, and I'm hoping it won't always be, because I'm on a mission to change things as much as I can, and I'm not the only person. So I am fully aware of people that have been tradesmen their entire life, and they want better for their children because they're sick and tired of jumping through hoops and being treated poorly. And that's the problem in the construction industry. It's not the fact that it's expensive and costs. It's an absolute BS. It really is. That's what all the big companies will tell you while they're scoring the highest profits they've ever had. And obviously, because they're big companies, we can see what they're doing and where all their money's going and where their training centres in the Algarve and the Seychelles are, which are basically just the directors' personal homes, and they use them as training centres. Like it happens all the time. It is corrupt. The construction industry is corrupt, and ultimately, so many people just allow it because that's how it's always been done. Well, I call that out, and I think it's not the way it needs to be done. So people should be paid properly and on time. And back to the point I was making before, a lot of the directors I work with, company owners, entrepreneurs, they are beaten mentally before they've even got into what I call the ring. And so I support them and I stand by them, and I'm a force to be reckoned with, as you both know. And because they go into a situation where they've been told subconsciously and their entire life since they were a child that they are not academic and therefore they can't be in an academic environment. So when you're up against QSs or other people that are qualified and professionals like myself, they feel like they're on the back foot, and ultimately they are not. And the Construction Act is on their side. If they've got a decent contract, even if they don't have a decent contract, the contract should be on their side, and they are entitled to get paid on time. And all the crazy excuses, I did a newsletter on it recently, of why people don't get paid. It's nonsense. It's total utter nonsense. And the people that get paid are the ones that shout the loudest, and that's just the way it is. That is the way it is. It shouldn't be, but it is. But ultimately, if everybody keeps shouting louder and everybody keeps getting contractual, then ultimately people are going to have to pay. And if they don't get their crap together, if they don't get their design on time, if they don't get the information correct, if their design isn't coordinated, or all the other problems that end up on the front end, which are the client's or the main contractor's responsibility, then they have to pay. And that is the issue. And it's getting people's mindset changed to, do you know what, changing the industry so that it isn't exhausting and painful and stressful. Change the industry, and much more kids, much more people will want to be involved in it.
Well, surely if it gets to the point of whoever shouts the loudest, eventually everybody will shout so loud you can't hear anything.
You would think so, but I've been saying that for 25 years, and it's still whoever is one or two cases out of maybe 20 different contractors. There's only one, maybe two, three at an absolute push that will be contractual and will get paid on time, because the others just accept it because that's the way it is. It's crazy.
I mean, you and I have discussed, and I'm going to quickly slip this in there. So forgive me. So forgive me, Hamish, Michelle's been producing rather an excellent podcast called Taking the Con Out of Construction. The URL's at the bottom there. So if anybody wants to go and have a listen, we've done the first series and now just completed the second series. About to go out, will be complete. And the third series, we're going to get in some special guests. So looking forward to that. But what's important about that, we've talked about contracts a lot, Michelle. Mm-hmm. In fact, I always joke that it's your favorite word. But isn't it so that many players in the game of construction consider the concept of going contractual as they go it? It's like a dirty word. It's like, oh, you don't trust me.
I mean, I always say to my clients, we're going to get contractual, and I pre-warn them, you're going to get a phone call from a director of the business saying, why are you getting contractual? And that's when you know for well you've got on the back foot, and that's when the power is in your hands, and this is how we play. And I end up sort of coaching my clients how to take these phone calls, how to deal with them. And I've even written in big bold letters, they need you, or whatever it is, hints and tips, because I know they're having this call. But they are scared of going contractual, but you can go contractual without going atomic. And I will say to people, like, right, these are the three options that we've got. We can get a friendly couple of conversations, a few emails back and forth. I can get pretty formal, or I can go atomic. Where do you want to go? And I don't like going atomic because there isn't much return from that, and that's literally blowing everything up, and it can be a bit aggressive, and
there can be quite a lot of fallout.
There are better ways to do it, but also it's expensive because it takes a lot of time to get things back. But anyway, there's different levels, and I always suggest like just a few emails, a couple of conversations. Let's do it gently and trying to come mediate to some extent and come to a amicable situation, closure, and get something agreed. And obviously the level, it intensifies as people either ignore or just palm it off or get a bit blasé, and then ultimately they find out I'm not the type of person that goes away quietly, and I generally get what I want. But it does take a lot of convincing, and the thing that baffles me the most is the amount of times my clients are, but I don't want to upset the client. And I don't understand why people don't like to upset clients that don't pay them. Why do you want to keep jumping through hoops for a client that doesn't pay you, doesn't respect you, has no boundaries, tries to rip you off at last minute? And yeah, they keep giving you work, but it's work where you're losing money. It makes no sense to me. So that does baffle me. But when I say that to people, because it's the way they've always been and what they've always done, they're always taken aback and sort of think and go, yeah, and it does make me feel a little uncomfortable. And genuinely, we find out either the clients start getting paying or they find better clients. It's as simple as that. But that, on the other flip side of it, the clients are bad a lot of the time, not all of them by a long stretch, but there are a lot of clients that will take the piss, and they will take advantage of the situation, and they will take advantage of their professionalism or their team that know more about contracts and construction. And it's a bit of a game of cards, to be fair, and it's whoever's got the best poker face. Shouldn't be that way, but it is.
Oh, goodness. Equating the construction game to a card game. Hamish, would you like to take us home, sir?
It reminds me of when I was working in engineering, the very first job I picked up, and I was learning at the time because I'd been teaching for 10 years. And I moved in, I was meant to be moving into costing and all the rest of it. And what I couldn't actually figure out was how this company had got themselves into such a mess. They were advised by the bank to get somebody to sort of help out. And I sort of looked at the situation, and much of the work was for military, and it was military contracts, but they didn't actually sign the contract per se. Our client was working for the military, and they'd signed the contracts. And effectively, my boss at the time picked up this work, and he would get paid something like 3 months in arrears. Now, what I had to do to establish it and maintain
the standard government is 90-day payments standard.
So what I had to do, and this is why I sort of appreciate so much what Michelle was saying. I set it up, and I was clever enough. I used to have 3 to 4 different suppliers who provided the same products, so we could work through the one. Then we moved on to the next. Then we moved on to the next. And by the time we got to the 4th one, we start getting some money coming through to pay the first one. So after the 4th, we go back to the first again. And it was because my boss was too quiet. He didn't like to sign contracts. And it was interesting when I left to set up my own company, he went bust. because he went back to his old way of actually sort of doing things, and he couldn't actually sort of maintain it. But it does show you do need to actually sort of speak up. But I do think there's a lot to be said for helping out on the education side of things. We're not working. When we go back, and cool, we're going back a few years now to the good old secondary moderns, and we did work with trade. It wasn't quite as complicated, but the whole object was to work with students in a way in which they were actually going to be going on when they left school. If we encourage students whilst at school that working for yourself was a good way to go forward, and start speaking to them in contractual ways to get them to understand that kind of style of methodology, what a significant difference it would make to so many of them who had an interest. Because instead of stamping them saying, thou aren't academic, you don't need to be academic in this world. What you in fact, it's probably the last thing you need to worry about at all, because you've got all the academia you really want. As we say all too often, there's too much information coming through sometimes. However, what we can do is help our youngsters with their attitude to what they're doing, what they're going on to. And if we help with that attitude, it means they're going to stand up for themselves once they get out there. We're not working with our children. We're not working with our students in schools. It's the schools that really hold the key to this. They need to change radically, I think, to change the attitude. But it doesn't help the construction industry whilst they're doing what they're doing. And of course, they've got the big boys in the big builders, as we call them.
That is another entirely different topic. As ever, Michelle Carr trying to clean up the construction industry, one building site at a time, and Hamish McClay, who is trying to act as a proponent to get more people to take notice of these things. These are all educational podcasts I'm very pleased to be involved in, and there's more to come. Watch out for Property Quorum, Property Matters, and of course the amazing Cladding Matters on a Friday. But thank you all for taking part. Michelle Carr, Construction Alchemy, of course Hamish McClay was like to convey, and to all of you out there, please don't worry, Michelle's coming. There's light at the end of the tunnel. Try and keep the faith, and look after each other's mental health. Until next week, bye-bye.